Hi everyone. Yeah, Ezekiel is back again. All right. So in this video, let's talk about how to manage profiles, right? Spring profiles. Now, what are profiles? Now, say you have a dev environment, you have a staging environment, and you have a production environment, right? How do you manage properties in this environment? That's exactly what we want to be dealing with today. All right. Now, I've noticed how I've checked several projects, right? Or I've worked with several projects, several Spring projects. And I noticed that the way people tend to manage profiles tends to make it a bit confusing when they are switching environment, or they discover that, oh, there's one property in the dev environment that's not available on the staging environment, and things are breaking, especially when they go to production. So I want to give you a simple way. Now, I'm not saying this is the only way, but a simple way to manage your environment such that things are very, very cool to manage. All right. So let's get into it. So I have the project open. So as you know, when managing profiles or when managing environments in Spring, you want to look at the application.yaml. Some people use application.properties, which is totally fine, right? Application.yaml. Now, this is the strategy I always implore in my recent project. In the new projects I'm actually developing, right? I always try to follow this strategy. Now, I would always advise you keep this application.yaml. Let it be the base. Let it contain the common properties, right? Let it contain the common properties you have across all environments. Now, having this, what that does for you is that you only have it in one single place. Let me illustrate by an example. So now that we have this, I'm going to go ahead and just create. I'll go ahead and create another environment. And as you know, it's very easy to do. All you just need to do, follow the keyword application hyphen the environment name. I'll start with local.yaml. As simple as it is, I've created another environment. So this is another environment, right? Now, this local, so for those that are working on their local systems, you could basically think about think of this like you're working on your local environment. So every property that is available on your local, but it's not available probably on UAT, on test, or on the other on production, you have it here. Personally, I don't like to commit this, right? I just leave this on my local system. It's not committed. Probably I have some configuration that are peculiar to me, right? Maybe we are basically using a Postgres, right? But I now have a version of Postgres that contains some data on my local environment. I want to configure things here. All right, let's go ahead and create another. I'm going to go ahead and create, for those that run 3 environments, let's say dev environments. Remember, everything I do here also applies to properties, okay? Now I have this. Now next up, let's create yet another environment. I'll go and create another environment and I'll call it UAT, right? UAT, the YAML, right? So this is the segmentation. And finally, let's do one more, which is application hyphen prod.yaml. All right. Now, you see, what I noticed after viewing codes, or should I say after some projects, or should I say some projects I've worked on, this is what I've noticed. You see the way I have all these properties here, you will see everything duplicated. Everything is duplicated in all the environments. Everything is duplicated in all the environment. And it shouldn't be, because what you just typically done is very difficult to manage. It means when you change something here, you must also come here to change the same thing. You must also come here to change the same thing, right? You must maintain the same thing. No, it shouldn't be. So what I will do is that starting from my local, I'm going to remove everything, right? I'll remove everything in prod, and I'll remove everything in UAT. I will only focus here. I'll only focus here. The only thing I'm going to change, right? The only thing I'm going to change here is that I will now start externalizing. That's what I will do. I would externalize. So by externalizing, what then happens is, depending on the environment, I would then inject that externalized property into that environment. And then when I'm on that environment, it will pick it up. And that's what we're going to be exploring fully in this video. So I'm not going to change everything that we have here. I'm just going to externalize all these properties. After externalizing all these properties, then I would then pick a particular environment to work with. So let's start with this. All right, so the context, remember we use this here. So if you look at the usage, we use this here when we're actually defining all the startup process for a Spring, right? When we're actually defining this, we're using the context refresh startup. So if you're using Ultimate, if you just control click or command click, if you're Windows or a Mac, when you do so, it just takes you to the usage. All right. So what I'm going to do, let's start externalizing. So I'll come in. So this is the context. I'll call it. Please follow the syntax. The syntax is very simple. It's a $sign, a curly brace, then give it the property name. So call it context text underscore text. Then I do this. What I've just done is I'm saying look for this property in the current environment I'm connected to. If you don't find it, defaults to this. I don't know if that makes sense, guys. So I'm saying I'll go over it again. Look for this property context underscore text in the current environment I'm connected. So current environment could be dev, local, prod, or UAT. I'll show that in a bit. If you don't find it, defaults to this. That is what it means. Now let's go ahead. The ports. We might want to change ports for several environments. So I'll go ahead and do this. Go ahead and do this, and I'll do server underscore port. The same thing I'm saying. If you don't find the server.port in the environment, use 8080. That's the logic. The same thing, let's do this. I'm going to come here and I'm going to call this is feature underscore payment underscore enabled, right? And I'll set it to false, right? Then I'll come here also and I'll do is underscore redis underscore cluster. That's the cluster. And what is the value? The value was false. So I'll default it to false. Now, for this also, I'll just probably call it management. So I can use this full word. So for, in order to be very, very explicit, to know exactly what it's meant for, it's okay, use long context and it's totally fine, right? In this case, I'm going to pick this up. I'm going to say, I'm going to do this. Now say management underscore endpoints underscore web underscore exposure underscore include, and I'll set it to this, right? And finally this part here, and I'll have endpoint underscore health underscore a health, then underscore show details. All right, show details, and I'll mark it as always, right? Okay, this is management because it actually follows, so it's management. So I need to add this management. Now, what have I done? Typically, what I've done, regardless of the environment I actually switch to, please keep in mind, regardless of the environment, all this will still work, right? All this will still work. Now, if I'm on dev, everything, so the way Spring works is when Spring loads, Spring will load the application.yaml first, or application.properties, right? Before now, or rather in time past, there's something called bootstrap.yaml. Now, if I add bootstrap.yaml, bootstrap.yaml is the first thing to be looked at, bootstrap.yaml. But however, let's keep it to this context. That is why if you look at former projects, some people use bootstrap.yaml. It picks up bootstrap.yaml. If it does not find it, then it looks at application.yaml. In this case, we are looking at application.yaml. So this will be the first that will basically be interacted with. It will load all this into context. That's how Spring works. Spring will load all this into context. Then, if the current environment you set is dev, right? It will then look at dev. If there's any conflicting property between YAML and dev, it will then override what it has in here. I don't know if that makes sense. So I'm going to illustrate this way. So we have, so it will pick application.yaml. After picking everything, loading it into context, it will then go to your environment, the current environment. Say you're probably on dev. It will then pick application.dev. So application-dev.yaml. Then to then pick this. Now, what it then does is, if there's any conflicting property, let's put this, let's take this and put this in dev. Right? Okay, I wanted to remove this, so let's remove this also. Let's say we now have this in dev. And now label this to be ZEBS 22222, or let's say 2222, right? If we do this, currently the first instance, it will basically pick z underscore EBS. Then because dev is now the current context I picked, it will then check, do I have context underscore text in z EBS? It will then check, oh yes, it exists. So it will then override, it will use this to override what you basically have in here. So what you will find if you load this in dev environment will be z EBS. Let's quickly test that out. All right. So right now we've been able to actually do this. All right, let me take this off. Let me take this off. Now, there is another issue people run into. Before we test this out, there's something very critical I need to mention. So how do you switch? How do you switch? So I discovered that people don't really know how to use the property in switching from one environment to the other. I'm just going to give you a simple way to do it, right? A simple way to do it. What you should do in your application.yaml, which is the first to be loaded, add in Spring Profiles Active. So that's Spring Profiles Active. Now remember, it's YAML is indented, right? Spring Profiles Active. Now what this does for you is, remember this is the first one to be loaded, so I'm just going to give it, I'll give it a property also, right? I'll give it a Spring underscore profile. So what it means is whatever value I put in here, you said I'm not adding anything here. The base is default. This is default, right? This is called default, right? If you don't load anything, it always loads in default. If you load it in, if you just do something, let's just load this application now. If we load it in, okay, I think I've messed up one of the property. Let's see value. Okay, I think I know where this is coming from. Let's see, one of the values I've gone. I think when I externalize, I picked off one of those values. Let's see where it's coming from. So let's check the exceptions. A value must be valid characters, okay? All right, let's check this. I'm sure I have nothing in here, nothing in here, nothing in here, okay? So value must be valid characters. So let's check this out. I'm suspecting this might be the case. Let's try again. Okay, great. All right, so let's see the profile. Can you see? The profile is always default. So let's even remove this. Let's say I didn't add this at all. Let's load it again. As you can see, right? As you can see, you see, it's default. You always find that it is default, right? I hope that is clear. So if I'm not saying the current environment I want it to pick, I want it to pick dev. So if I say I want it to pick dev, please note, even though I specified this should be dev, what would happen is it will still load all this into context, then go to dev, and then load everything in dev and use what is in dev to override what is in this. I hope this is clear, guys. You might probably want to rewind and listen to this again. So let me mention it again. It loads this first into context, then it then checks the current environment you set, which is dev. Then it goes into dev and loads everything in dev. Once it loads up dev, it now check, is there a conflict? Does this property in dev, does it exist in the base? If it does, oh yes, you then override it. And let's test it out. Now that I've changed this to dev, let's see the usage of this. And let's put in a breakpoint and let's see what this property now is. So first off, I'll put it back to default. Remember, it's default. Either I specify or I don't specify. It's always default, right? So let's go to default and let's see. You can see, and what is the value? See, the property is what? Z underscore EBS, correct? Now let's go back and switch this. Let's switch this to dev now, right? Let's switch this to dev. Let's switch this to dev and let's load this up. And what can you see? Can you see the property is now ZEBS2222? I hope this is clear, guys. Now, does it mean that does it mean that it forsakes all this? All these are still available, like I mentioned. All these are still available. And how do I know? Let's release this. You see the port? The port that I mentioned, let's check the port. See, the port is still 8080. The port is still 8080. Like I mentioned, it loads all this, then it overrides it with the next environment or the environment you've now set. I hope this is clear, guys. This is the recommended way. I always advise you always load this up. Now, why am I proposing this approach? The major reason why I'm proposing this approach is that you now have very few property in the other environments. Dev, local. If you have dev, local, prod, UAT, now have little environment. You only place what is changing. I hope that is clear, guys. Let me say that again. Only place what is changing in this environment. In my case, this is the only thing that is changing here. Every other thing, all these defaults will work for dev, local, prod, and UAT. Now, what does this mean for you? What this means for you is, so while you have all properties, all the environments, right? Just put in the only thing that you are sure is changing. Now let's take a typical example. This is a typical example. In prod, apparently, you don't want to expose. In prod, you don't want to expose this. You don't want to expose star. Star is too expensive because it loads in so many things. But at the same time, in prod, you don't. It's not a. Should I say it's given? Most often time, you don't want to set this. You just want to only expose health, info, and Prometheus. Most often times. Now, if that is all you need, right? Just come in here. Copy this guy. Come to prod, and just set this. Set this to health, info. Let's stick to health and info now. For now. Now let's run this. Let's see what happens. Let's keep this to default or dev, which is fine because it's still the same thing. Let's load it up. Now let's bring up a browser. And let's load localhost actuator health. All right, actuator health is still there, so let's go to actuator, just actuator alone. And what do you see? If you look at it, it loads actuator beans, conditions, all this, right? It loads health. Health is also involved. Everything, it loads everything you need. All right. It also loads info. Now let's now switch the property to prod. You switch the property to prod. If I run this again, okay, now let's check. Can you see? The only thing that exposes now what? Info and health. I hope this is clear. Info and health. So you can then choose to then navigate things how you want. Now, another common pattern or common thing I see people do is that you then have probably one single file, which is Docker, right? You have one single file, which is Docker. And when you have Docker, you then use all these properties in there, right? Use all these properties in there, right? And then you can then be switching if you're doing things like Kubernetes. If you're using Kubernetes or you're using OpenShift, right? That actually manages the Kubernetes orchestrator. You can then start switching things. That is also fine, right? But the whole idea is, please don't duplicate all your properties in all the environment. It is not okay. Either you don't want to use any of this and you're just using a single Docker file, or you split it in an environment like this. Let all your configuration reside in one single place, right? Everything reside like this. So you basically just have the base property, then externalize it and put in the default. The default doesn't change, let it be that same way. If it's changing, only put what is changing in the corresponding environment. That way, you get to be able to manage things well. So when you add a new property, just load it inside your defaults and things will get to work as it is. Then, if a requirement then comes that, oh, this particular property should change for part of the UAT environment, you only just need to modify either here in your UAT environment, or since you are externalizing it inside a file or inside the environment, you can then do that. Now, let me quickly show you one single way to do that. Now, if I pick this up, remember, this is the main context and this is default. Let's say I want this to run on dev. So what I would do, the easiest way, if you want to test it out in IntelliJ, right, click on this, go to more, run default, then go to modify run configuration. When you do that, there's something called environment variable. So I can just paste this as environment variable and I'll set this to dev, right? That is how to simulate as if you've actually injected into environment, right? It's the same thing as doing this. It's the exact same thing as doing export this, then equals to, let me make this UAT, right? So if you basically check echo and do spring and basically say, show me what I place in as a value here, you see it shows you UAT. So it's the same thing. On Windows, it's the same thing as doing the environment variable, right? Environment variable, when you're setting things inside the environment variable. The same thing on Linux when you're actually putting things, exporting, right? And the same thing basically works on Mac. So achieve the same thing in IntelliJ, because people have that issue most times. Just I'll go over it again. EBS, more or run config, then modify run configuration. You can do it from here, or this is set to application. You can also click down here and click on edit configuration, and it gives you basically the same thing, right? Where you can actually set those things. The environment variable is here. I set this one here, but I'm actually setting this part also here. I'm setting this run config basically here. So either way, you can basically have things done. All right, so I hope that's basically clear. All right, so let's quickly test this out and let's see how it works. So let me go from this part. Let's pick this guy here. You can separate things using, you see, you can separate it using semicolon. And I'm gonna do Spring Profile, and I'll set this to dev. So let's apply this and let's run it. As you can see, what can you see? The active profile is dev, even though the default is prod. I hope this typically clears things up for you guys. So I hope this now shows you how to better manage everything as regarding your environment properties. Let's go over it again one more time. Remember, always keep this default. All your properties should be in this default. Just externalize it and put the default you want in here, right? Put the default in here, or the default values, but your configuration, entire configuration should be in here. It's very easy to manage. Only what is changing should be placed in here. In fact, if you don't want to do this, I mentioned that if you have a single file like Docker, you can basically just change this within. Like the same, I just pick this, I just place it in my environment variable, which I showed here. And like I mentioned, it's the same thing as doing system doing the environment variable bits in Windows or exporting in a Linux. Whichever way works for you, you can go that route. But the goal here is to ensure that you keep things simple so that you can better manage your configuration file. With that being said, I'll see you guys in the next video.